Hi everyone, so today I'm going to do a demonstration for students wishing to use paint for their project. I'm going to use just this piece of paper. It's like a thicker sketchbook paper for my palette. And I'm only going to put a little bit of paint on at a time so I don't waste. This is tempera paint. Acrylic paint would be fine. If you have watercolor, that's a different video. So red and green, as you know, because we went over it, are complementary colors. And when they're next to each other, they really pop and there's high contrast. But when you mix them, you make browns. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're doing your color mixing. The other setup I have here is I have my water cup and I have a couple paint brushes. Okay, so I'm going to put this aside, actually just right here. And the first technique I'm going to show you is called a dry brush technique. So I'm going to dip my brush into a color and I'm going to take some of it off. I don't want a lot on the brush. And I could dab it to create a nice texture. And I think once we let that dry and I come back to it, I'm going to show you how dry brushing over it can be really nice. Now I'm going to switch colors. And I also have a paper towel handy. A rag would be fine. And I'm going to, wipe it off and let that dry. You don't want to wash your brushes right in the sink, as this can clog your drain. So you definitely want to wash it here, like in a cup. Wipe the extra off first, and then wash it in this like cup. All right, so dry brush. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to show you how to blend smooth. So blending to create smooth tones. Now I'm going to pick a different brush. This one has different bristles. It's a little smoother. And I'm going to go from one color to another. And I'm going to actually use white and red. So what I'm going to do is dip into my paint. And I can use some of the water to help it blend. I'll dip into my water. And I'm thinning out the paint. All right, so let's say I want to start transitioning to the white. I can add a little bit. And you have to work sort of quick to get a nice smooth transition before it dries. And the water definitely helps to activate it, but if you add too much water, well, then it can become more like what's called a glaze. And that's like a really thin, almost transparent color, which might be what you want. That line there, I kind of want to remove, so I might add a little bit more red in there to make that color that's probably in between. Smooth it out. A little bit more white. So the trick here is working the color or the transition while it's wet. That's the trick. So now I'm going to add even more white in here. And what I'm doing is making different values. I am tinting the red. Remember, tinting is adding white to lighten a color. Now you could always use a second coat if you need to. You don't want to use like copy paper. The paper that I'm using is actually a multimedia sketchbook, which I really like. It's mixed media. You could use canvas or just a thicker type, like a Bristol board, but you don't want to use like copy paper. Okay, so now brush strokes. This is where I want you to practice just creating different types of brush strokes. So try using one with water to make it flow really nice. Try making some nice thin lines. And maybe some thick lines. Maybe try using a couple different brushes. Maybe try mixing some values in there. Let some of the brush strokes show. Maybe try doing some hatching and some cross hatching lines. Okay, the next one, splatter. All right, I'm gonna actually do like a little bit of a really quick, very quick sort of background color. So I added a little bit of some red there, just so I can show you how it looks when you splatter over a color. The dry brush technique, so I put it on wet and blended it right away. That's a good technique for blending. So yes, I just blended, but I'm going to show you how to splatter using the brush. I wanted to just get a nice background there. So we'll come back to that. We'll let that dry for a minute. The next one is stippling. Stippling is a lot of fun. One technique you might want to try is to have more than one color on a brush. So I might grab a little bit of red and a little bit of green. Maybe I'll go in with some white in a little bit, and I'm just dabbing. I'm adding little dots, dab, 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 stipple, stipple, stipple. And again, the fun part here is having more, let me get a little closer there, more than one color already loaded on your brush. And that adds for some nice mixing. Simply how to stipple. Okay, so that's the stippling technique. Now I think we'll come back to splatter. I think it's dry enough. It's dry to the touch. And dry. And I'm going to add some white paint on there. Not like a ton. Now you're going to want to make sure that when you do this, you are protecting the other areas that you don't want the splatter. So I might want to take a piece of paper that can protect the areas, maybe two pieces of paper that I don't want to ruin, and maybe protect my surface too, my table. So now that my area is protected, I can put the paint on the brush. A toothbrush works great for this. It's a great way to make snow or stars. And yeah, your hand might get a little messy. You could also kind of go like this, but I think this works better for this type of brush that I'm using. All right, so what you're gonna do is I want you to find on the color wheel 2 complementary colors. So those are 2 colors that are opposite of each other, like red and green, or blue and orange, yellow and purple. And I'm going to have you put them right next to each other. And then mix them together in the middle. And you can see that the green and the red make a neutral. Now I had red on the brush, so it kind of it almost made a black. So I tell students, make your own blacks. It's for you to keep the painting looking less flat. So I'm kind of transitioning. This is a red to, like, I put red right over the green. So like a red apple, for instance, might have a shadow that has green, but then you go over it again with the red and it becomes like a nice brown. So again, the goal here was I made a version of red, a darker version of red, using its complement. All right, so that's pretty much your goal today. I think the last thing I wanted to show you actually was a little dry brush over top of, if I have any dry brushes left. I think everything's like kind of wet, but a little dry brush over another color is kind of nice as well. So that's really wet, right? So then maybe, do I have another brush? I think I do. That's a great way to add levels and layers to your work. Dry brushing right over something. See, that's wet, so you would have to, use a dry brush. It's dabbing. And if it's wet, you have to, let the brush dry or pick a different brush, or it's not dry brush. There we go. So I just got a totally dry brush, not wet at all, brand new brush. And I'm using the dry brush technique. That's dabbing, and this is dry brush. It's a great way to add, again, some texture or some subtle levels, layers. All right, have fun. I hope this helped you. Try some of these techniques if you're going to be using paint for your project.